Hey everyone, Dan here. We are well after market close on Wednesday, June 30th. Today we're going to take a look at CM Sciences. Before we get into it, if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe button. It helps a lot. And feel free to comment below with your thoughts, opinions, ideas, tickers you'd like me to cover. This ticker was suggested by a commenter in a YouTube video. I do keep a list of all of them and I get to them as soon as I can. All right, so CMLF had a good day today. You see volume up higher than normal, about twice as high as it usually is, and a nice 3 plus, almost 4% bump in the share price. So if you're not familiar with CMLF, and I hadn't looked at it at all before this, but they are a blank check company, aka a SPAC, and they are set to merge, or they've announced their target, or what have you. Sema4 announced filing of proxy statement in connection with the proposed merger. So this was on the 6th of May. And then, recently, there's just been some sort of like talking about Sema4 reported 64.4 million in revenue for 3 months. And so some earnings data, some press releases around people who they're bringing in into key roles at the company and things like that. And so, it's been a good run for it in the SPAC life cycle. So typically, what we see in the SPAC life cycles, if you're not that familiar, is, we have this offering, usually right around $10. We'll see it come up a little bit. Sometimes we'll see these big run-ups if, there's a lot of faith in the management company. In the management for the SPAC, just basically saying that like they typically are able to acquire really high value targets that, maybe if they were left to their own devices in a few years, they could go public without a SPAC, but this sort of like expedites the process for them. So we did see a giant run up there, and then there's typically like this big cooling off period as folks await for things to be sorted and a target to be selected and things like that. So if we look here, we're talking about what this was filed on the 6th of May. So on the 6th of May here, we saw some additional dipping back down close to the offering price, but since then it's been on a nice trajectory upward. Obviously a lot of room to claw back if we look at this total chart, but starting off pretty well. So then typically what we would see is as the merger date approaches and the actual like ticker is going to change, we'll continue to see a big run up in the stock price, and then usually like some sort of like choppy action, so maybe some up, maybe some down, and then eventually a little bit of cooling off and selling off as the hype dies down, the volume probably dies down, and some things kind of, settle into place. So I know that I showed that one thing we have here. Sema4 and CM Sciences announced a filing, so we're talking about on May 6th. So things seem to be full speed ahead. Typically when they get, to this point, the next big catalyst news-wise is the vote that the shareholders take on whether or not they want to approve this. It doesn't look like that's happened yet, but maybe it has. Again, I'm just looking at this like today. And so usually when that approval happens and the merger is, finalized and all systems are go, then we'll see this like really nice spike and run up, in anticipation of the ticker symbol change actually taking place. So let's do some charting here and see what we might be able to look for. Let's take the last 3 months of activity. It's going to tell us the most, in my opinion. So the biggest thing to me, just because I think that these are one of the most reliable ways to trade, would be to follow this channel. So this is on a nice up channel. And trim a little off the top, a little off the bottom, because there's always some sort of like poking through of price action. But for all intents and purposes, it's tested this bottom about 4 really solid times, tested the top 4 really solid times. So essentially the way that I like to think about playing channels is I would take a buy at the bottom. So if you'd done it here, you would have bought it about 1080, and then you wait for it to hit the top. Maybe it was sold out at 1295, and then you wait for it to come back down to the bottom. And as it starts to show price strength, you take a position. So maybe you would have taken one at about 11.92, ride it up to the top, 13.03, sell out, and just rinse and repeat, and just always dip by the bottom on a show of strength and always take profit at the top, and just do it over and over and over and over again. It's really an interesting, or I guess really a predictable, it's not interesting, it's a really valuable way to trade and limit your risk. So I would predominantly pay attention to the channel during the run-up. Obviously, that channel will break at some point, so just keep that in mind. All channels eventually break, and it'll probably be due to like some big, news catalyst as part of the SPAC life cycle. Something big will happen, and it'll just sort of like thrust it into another category of price. Its neighbor prices will be much, much different than its currently at right now. These price zones that I'm plotting in here, these are likely support and resistance zones as indicated by previous support and resistance in these areas. So big potentials for buys and sells in those areas historically speaking. So we would expect that to continue. Continuing to look back here, that 1474 is pretty close to where we are right now. And then we have a zone up around here. Mid-15s would be our next sort of place to get some supports and then build off of. So it's right now battling around this 1425. So if it falls down from here, I would look for it to either like catch on the bottom of the channel or that 1353 zone would be the next most obvious one. Could plot a couple of other higher price points since I plotted many, many more to the downside than to the upside. But I would look at like this zone right here, 1612, and then this will probably about do it until it gets there, just shy of 17 resistance zone there. So that's what I would look for. Support zones to the downside, take profit or dip buying into price strength zones to the upside. I personally would play the channel above any of those things. The indicators, before we call it a day for this video, relatively high, so could bring in some selling pressure like we were talking about, pushing it down toward the bottom of that channel, giving folks an opportunity to dip buy and hope that it doesn't break the channel already, now that we've just identified it. MACD still showing pretty bullish, is potentially closing in a little bit on the signal line. We do see the bullish momentum dying down here a bit on the histogram, so that's curling back toward flattening out, or maybe some bearish pressure coming in for a short-term sell-off, and then a nice uptick back up. But right now, still in bullish formation on the MACD. All right, well, that'll do it for this one. I hope these thoughts and ideas gave you something to consider. Always do your own due diligence before making any trade. Don't just take anything that anyone says as the 100% fact and truth and run with it. All right, well, thanks a bunch. I wish you the best of luck in the rest of the trading week, and I will see you in the next video.